Welcome to Russia Update. Today we're going to talk about the huge weapons package Ukraine will receive from America. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe. There's a big relief in Ukraine because the US House of Representatives has agreed to a new weapons package. This was blocked for months due to internal political agendas. If the Senate agrees on Tuesday, the weapons delivery will resume. Mike Johnson, the head of the Republicans in the House of Representatives, had been against this weapons package for months. But now he suddenly gave his approval. What made him change his mind? He says he recently saw a report from the CIA, after which he concluded that the threat from China, Russia, and Iran was actually much worse than he thought. He now calls Russia the axis of evil, a term coined by Reagan and used by Bush. Now Mike Johnson is warning about this danger and emphasizes that money should go to Ukraine because it's the first line of defense. He's deeply religious, and has recently received a letter from Baptists, members of a Christian group. The letter stated that there are many Baptists living in Ukraine who are suffering greatly from the war. For a man like Mike Johnson, this is a reason to want to send money to Ukraine. Also, his son became a Marine. Mike Johnson said, "I'd rather have fighting in Ukraine than have our boys, Americans, ever go to Ukraine." There's talk about the rebels, a group of hardcore Republicans stemming from the Trump movement. The New York Post has this headline today: Marjorie Taylor Greene, a politician and avid Trump supporter, always talks about the Nazis in Ukraine and says they shouldn't be funded with American dollars. That's quite unusual. Zelensky is Jewish, so it's at least an interesting statement. Again, Marjorie is someone who always aligns very closely with Trump. Whatever he wants should happen. But she's outraged at what's happening with the money now, and it's a lot of money they're signing off on. In total, it's almost $100 billion. Israel is included, as well as Taiwan, and there's a portion reserved for an American base in the South China Sea. According to Marjorie, this money could be better spent internally. But what's striking is that a lot of this money ultimately ends up with the American arms industry. That's internal too. But her voting behavior also shows that she doesn't always agree with internal funding for America. So, there's a difference between what she says and what she does. On the other hand, as a politician, she's not exactly an exception in this regard. Mike Johnson has certainly changed his mind, which will cause quite a stir. There's a chance he'll be removed as leader of the House of Representatives. The future will tell in the coming weeks. Of the $60 billion, $13 billion goes directly to Ukraine. That's the most direct aid they're getting, and they can use it to buy weapons. A lot of money is also going to Europe to start operations there, and a lot is being spent on the American arms industry, which will eventually send weapons to Ukraine. Russia has already said this will cost a lot of lives. This makes the war bigger and more explosive. Putin will undoubtedly be furious. But every time the West does something to help Ukraine, there's angry growling from the Kremlin. This is a very serious step. It's becoming a direct conflict with NATO. We're hearing that now too. Obviously, this is the last thing Russia wants. What difference will this make in the short term? Zelensky has already said that victory is in sight. That will be very difficult by numbers. Zelensky is always positive, always saying Ukraine won't lose. It's too early to celebrate, but this is a very important step for him. With this, they can hit Russian targets far behind the lines, and that could make a big difference. Ukraine is under increasing pressure in many places on the front lines. When will the weapons arrive at the front? And where is the heaviest fighting expected in the coming weeks? If it had been the Cold War, it would have been simple for the Americans. They would have drawn a lot from depots in Europe, but now, the weapons mainly go on direct flights from the US to Ukrainian neighboring countries like Poland. From there, they will cross the border, and then travel about 1,000 kilometers to the front. The US Senate still needs to approve the aid package, and then President Joe Biden will sign. But the Pentagon knows very well what Ukraine's needs are. The moment that button is pressed, it'll start running. According to a Democratic senator, the first weapons will be on their way before the end of this week. But even before those weapons reach the front, the support affects the battlefield. It won't get any calmer in the coming weeks, says Patrick Boulder, defense expert at the Hague Center for Strategic Studies. The former Air Force lieutenant colonel thinks the Russians are ramping up the pressure while they still can. Ukraine can respond to these attacks with full firepower, because enough ammunition is coming in to sustain the defense in the long term. Boulder believes that just the announcement of the support package is good for Ukrainian morale. In recent months, artillery units had to let targets go that their drone colleagues had seen to save shells. The brakes are really coming off now. The operational units on the front line will have their supplies replenished. Stories about artillery units without shells and air defense without missiles will soon be a thing of the past. As soon as those American supplies come in from the rear, you can push the supplies you have forward. Despite a huge firepower advantage, Russia has not made major gains. The industrial town of Avdiivka fell in February. Now the occupiers are striking at the strategic town of Chasiv Yar. Boulder outlines that the Russian tactic remains the same: destroy everything so that the defense can't hide anywhere. But Ukraine found it increasingly difficult to withstand these attacks. It shoots down fewer and fewer Russian rockets, leaving the civilian population heavily under fire in frontline cities like Kharkiv. And above Chasiv Yar, Russian fighter jets flew without fear of air defense. Boulder expects Kiev to quickly send air defense missiles there. That's where air defense is needed most urgently. You want to drive away the Air Force so that you can fight mainly on the ground. It seems unlikely that the American weapon support will suddenly lead to new offensive plans by the warlords in Moscow and Kiev. Local attacks are not to be ruled out in the coming weeks, but at the operational level, it's two beasts eyeing each other. Who will start first? We're speaking of a war of attrition where chess pieces are already on the board, but only later will move. Even the 300,000 troops Russia reportedly wants to mobilize by this summer, according to Ukraine, are for a later phase in the war. The extra ammunition coming from Europe and the US is crucial for Ukraine to have staying power, but Russia can accelerate the attack plans it already has. The Russians are also finding out that they don't have an unlimited amount of time. Let's look especially to the north of the Donbas region. Russia has amassed a large mechanized force on the border of the Luhansk and Kharkiv provinces. But will the Russians be able to suddenly strike under that time pressure? So far, we've seen with the Russians that they have operational and logistical problems coordinating and acting on a large scale. Even with a huge difference in firepower, Ukraine has forced Russia to sacrifice huge numbers of troops and equipment for small gains in terrain. Meanwhile, Kiev still holds reserves. They do this because, in all likelihood, a bigger offensive awaits them. The support from Europe and the US is being released increasingly slowly, but it looks like Moscow will still be disappointed. They're finding out that Western support is less limited than they thought. Last week, Germany decided to deliver a Patriot system after pleas from Ukraine. It says it needs 5 to 7 extra Patriots in the short term to protect itself against Russian air attacks. Once Germany has delivered its system, Ukraine will have 4 Patriot batteries. NATO. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg also called on member states to deliver Patriots, but concrete commitments are still pending. In Europe, attention is focused on Spain and Greece. The latter country is hesitant to give away a Patriot system because tensions still exist with Turkey. The United States is said to have promised to defend Greek airspace and replace the Patriot if it is damaged in Ukraine. Ukraine is also interested in Greek S-300 systems. These are Soviet-made and already in use in Ukraine. The United States is confident that it can get some packages of weapons and ammunition to the front within a few days. How does that work? Is a delivery within a few days realistic? And will the American storage facilities be empty after the delivery? At the Pentagon, the building of the U.S. Department of Defense, they do not wait for approval from the Senate and the President. Employees have been working for a while to prepare the packages of military equipment. That's what anonymous sources tell the American news website Politico. This way, once the President approves it, the aid package can quickly be pushed through the bureaucratic process, they say. The Pentagon never sits still. To get approval in the House of Representatives took months. The military prepared so that, when the political decision was finally made, they could switch quickly. What that will actually mean on the battlefield, you'll have to keep an eye on our page. While you're at it, check out our other videos and give this video a like. It would really help us out.